Africa's independence was supposed to be a new dawn, but the continent's story remains unfinished. The old colonial powers never truly let go. Economic and political control just became more subtle. Neo-colonialism shapes everything from trade deals to daily life, keeping true sovereignty out of reach. But a new generation is demanding change, calling for leaders who will break the old system, not just manage it. In West Africa, a bold new voice is rising, challenging the status quo and inspiring millions. This is the story of a young soldier whose vision could mark the start of Africa's next chapter. Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso is that new voice. At 34 he became the world's youngest head of state, a break from the old guard. Traoré is a soldier, not a career politician, and his message is clear. Burkina Faso for Burkinabe, Africa for Africans. He calls for food sovereignty, resource control, and security, without foreign interference. His actions, renegotiating mining contracts, expelling foreign troops, and prioritizing self-sufficiency, are resonating across Africa. Traoré's rise is more than a local event. It's a test case for a continent hungry for real independence. Is he the spark for a wider movement? This is what we'll explore. Traoré's journey began in rural Bondakouy, far from power and privilege. He grew up grounded in community, shaped by scarcity, and aware of his country's untapped potential. Studying geology at university, he saw firsthand the wealth beneath Burkina Faso's soil. But he chose the army, serving on the front lines against insurgency. Traoré earned respect for his courage and connection with ordinary soldiers. His experience in the Sahel gave him a raw understanding of the nation's crisis, far removed from official statements. This background forged a leader determined to change the system, not just serve it. Rising through the ranks, Traoré saw Burkina Faso's state unravel. Jihadist groups exploited weak governance, while foreign-backed leaders failed to restore order. Soldiers like Traoré felt abandoned by a corrupt, detached political class. The 2022 coup led by Damiba promised change but delivered more of the same. Security worsened and hopes faded. Frustration now turned inward toward their own leaders. Traoré realized that real change required more than a new face at the top. It demanded a radical new vision. By September 2022, Burkina Faso was at a breaking point after another deadly attack. Traoré and fellow officers saw no choice but to act, removing Damiba in a dramatic coup within a coup. Their message reclaimed sovereignty, end reliance on foreign powers, and put security back in Burkinabe hands. The public rallied behind Traoré, desperate for results, not promises. At 34 he became Africa's youngest leader, not by ambition, but by necessity. Traoré's rise marked a radical break from the past, opening a new, uncertain chapter for his country. Whether history sees him as a patriot or a disruptor, his leadership is reshaping the future of Burkina Faso, and perhaps Africa itself. Upon taking power, Captain Traoré immediately made it clear that his vision for Burkina Faso began deep underground, with the nation's vast mineral resources. For too long the country's immense gold wealth had been a source of paradox, enriching foreign multinational corporations, while the Burkinabe people saw little benefit. The deals struck by previous governments were often opaque, favoring external interests, and leaving the nation with just a fraction of the profits from its own soil. Traoré's administration declared this economic model unacceptable and unsustainable. The first pillar of his revolution was simple yet profound. The wealth of Burkina Faso must first serve the people of Burkina Faso. This marked a direct challenge to the established neo-colonial economic order. The new government wasted no time in translating this principle into action. It initiated a comprehensive review of all mining contracts held by foreign companies, signaling that business as usual was over. Contracts deemed unfair or not in the national interest were placed under intense scrutiny, with the explicit threat of renegotiation or outright termination. This move sent shockwaves through the international mining community but was met with overwhelming support at home. It was a tangible demonstration that the new leadership was serious about reclaiming economic sovereignty. The goal was not to scare away all investment, but to reset the terms of engagement, ensuring that any partnership would be equitable and contribute meaningfully to national development. Beyond just reviewing contracts, Traoré's government took steps to build local capacity and ownership in the mining sector. The establishment of the country's first gold refinery was a landmark project, designed to process the raw gold domestically, rather than exporting it for refinement elsewhere. This move is critical because it allows Burkina Faso to capture a much larger share of the value chain, transforming it from a mere exporter of raw materials into a producer of a finished, high-value commodity. It is a strategic effort to break the cycle of dependency and build a self-reliant industrial base, creating jobs and retaining wealth within the nation's borders for the benefit of its citizens. This policy of resource nationalism is about more than just economics. It is a powerful statement of dignity and self-worth. It asserts that African nations are not simply resource depots for the global economy, but sovereign states with the right to control their own destiny. By taking on the powerful vested interest in the global mining industry, Captain Traoré is not just fighting for a better financial deal, he is fighting to change a mindset, to prove that an African nation can stand on its own feet and demand its fair share. This bold stance on natural resources forms the financial bedrock of his entire revolutionary project, aiming to fund the other pillars of his transformative vision. Captain Traoré understands a fundamental truth that many leaders have overlooked. A nation that cannot feed itself can never be truly sovereign. For years, Burkina Faso, like many of its neighbors, has been reliant on international food aid and imports to bridge its nutritional gaps, a vulnerability that creates dependency and can be exploited politically. In response, Traoré launched his second major initiative, an ambitious national drive for total food self-sufficiency. This was not just an agricultural policy. It was framed as a patriotic battle for survival and dignity. The goal was to mobilize the entire nation, especially its youth, to return to the land and produce enough food to feed every citizen. The government's agripreneur programs are at the heart of this vision, seeking to make farming attractive and viable for young people. Instead of seeking uncertain futures in overcrowded cities or risking their lives migrating abroad, youth are being encouraged and incentivized to become modern farmers. The state is providing them with land, seeds, fertilizer, and technical training to cultivate staple crops like rice, maize, and sorghum. This initiative aims to tackle youth unemployment and food insecurity simultaneously, turning a demographic challenge into an agricultural asset. It is a grassroots movement designed to empower a new generation of producers and rebuild the nation's food system from the ground up. This agricultural revolution is also deeply practical. The government has launched massive public works projects to develop irrigation systems, allowing for year-round cultivation and reducing reliance on unpredictable rainfall in the arid Sahel region. Warehouses are being constructed to store grain surpluses, creating a national food reserve to stabilize prices and ensure availability during lean seasons. This focus on infrastructure is critical to moving beyond subsistence farming towards a modern, productive agricultural sector capable of creating a surplus. Traoré's administration is demonstrating that food security is a matter of national priority, deserving of the same level of investment and strategic planning as national defense. Ultimately, the drive for food sovereignty is about breaking one of the most insidious chains of neocolonialism. A nation held captive by hunger is easily controlled. By empowering its people to cultivate their own land and feed their own families, Traoré's government is fostering a profound sense of independence and resilience. This pillar of his vision is not just about filling stomachs, it is about nourishing a national spirit of self-reliance. It sends a clear message that Burkina Faso will no longer wait for handouts. It will, with its own hands, sow the seeds of its own future, ensuring that the country's destiny is determined by its own harvest. The third and honestly most urgent pillar of Captain Traoré's vision is a complete overhaul of the national security strategy. He actually came to power because the previous approaches to fighting the jihadist insurgency had failed catastrophically. The old model, which heavily relied on the presence of foreign troops, especially from France, had not only proven ineffective but had also bred deep resentment among the Burkinabe population. Traoré's core belief is that the security of Burkina Faso can only be guaranteed by the Burkinabe people themselves. This meant ending the dependency on external forces and building a new defense architecture rooted in popular participation and national pride, a strategy that was both bold and, well, necessary. The most significant step in this direction was the demand for the withdrawal of all French troops from Burkinabe soil. This was a monumental decision, severing a long-standing military relationship with the former colonial power. For Traoré, it was a matter of principle. True sovereignty is impossible when foreign armies operate on your land with their own agendas. The move was immensely popular, seen as the reclaiming of national dignity. Instead of relying on foreign partners, the government turned inward, focusing on re-equipping and remotivating its own national army. The strategy shifted to empowering local soldiers who understood the terrain, the culture, and the conflict far better than any foreign contingent ever could. A key innovation in this new security doctrine is the massive expansion of the Volunteers for the Defense of the Fatherland, or VDP, a civilian auxiliary force. The government launched a nationwide recruitment drive, calling on patriotic citizens to join the VDP to help defend their local communities. Tens of thousands answered the call. This is a grassroots security model, empowering villages and towns to become the first line of defense against insurgents. The VDPs are given basic training and arms, and they work in close coordination with the army. This approach not only multiplies the state's security footprint but also fosters a sense of shared responsibility for the nation's survival. This ground-up security strategy is a profound departure from the top-down, foreign-led approaches of the past. It is a declaration that the fight against terrorism is not just a job for the army, but a cause for the entire nation. By arming and trusting its own citizens, the government is forging a powerful bond of unity and resilience in the face of a common enemy. While the risks are significant, the potential reward is immense. A nation that is secure not because of foreign protectors, but because its own people are united and determined to defend their homeland. This pillar of Traore's vision is ultimately about building a nation of citizens, not subjects. While the three pillars of resource control, food sovereignty, and grassroots security are focused internally on rebuilding Burkina Faso, Captain Traore's vision does not end at his country's borders. His rhetoric and actions are deeply infused with the spirit of Pan-Africanism, echoing the ideals of past revolutionary leaders like Thomas Sankara. Traore understands that the challenges facing Burkina Faso, neo-colonial exploitation, insecurity, and underdevelopment, are not unique to his nation. They are shared struggles across much of the continent. Therefore, he argues, the solutions must also be shared. His vision is inherently continental, promoting a future where African nations work together to achieve collective self-reliance. This Pan-African ambition is most clearly demonstrated in the forging of new regional alliances. Recognizing the limitations and perceived Western influence within the Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, Traore has pivoted towards his neighbors who share a similar political trajectory. Burkina Faso, alongside Mali and Niger, two other nations led by military governments that have broken with France, formed the Alliance of Sahel States, or AES. This alliance is more than a symbolic gesture. It is a mutual defense and economic cooperation pact. It creates a bloc of nations committed to solving their problems together, pooling their resources and defending one another from both internal threats and external pressures. The creation of the AES is a direct challenge to the old geopolitical order in West Africa. It represents a conscious decision to build new institutions that reflect the current realities and aspirations of the Sahelian people, rather than adhering to post-colonial structures that many feel have failed them. This new alliance aims to coordinate military operations against jihadist groups, promote trade between member states, and eventually create a political and economic federation. It is a practical application of the Pan-African dream, moving from rhetoric about African unity to the concrete work of building it brick by brick, treaty by treaty from the ground up. Captain Traore's message resonates far beyond the Sahel because it speaks to a continent-wide yearning for dignity and genuine independence. His unapologetic Africa First stance inspires young people from Senegal to Tanzania who are tired of the status quo. He is not just the leader of Burkina Faso, he has become a symbol of a new, assertive African consciousness. His vision suggests that the path to a stronger Africa lies not in seeking validation from the West, but in building solidarity with one's neighbors. It is a call for a continental awakening, urging Africans to believe in their own strength and to work together to finally complete the long-delayed project of liberation. One of Captain Traore's most decisive and symbolic acts was his confrontation with Burkina Faso's former colonial ruler, France. For years, a contingent of French special forces had been stationed in the country, ostensibly to help combat the jihadist insurgency that was spiraling out of control. However, for a growing number of Burkinabe, the French military presence was not a solution but a painful symbol of continued dependency and national humiliation. Their presence echoed the colonial past, a constant reminder that the nation's security was not fully in its own hands. Traoré's government channeled this public sentiment into official policy, declaring that this chapter of foreign military reliance had to end for good. In January 2023, Traoré's administration made a move that reverberated across Africa and Europe. It officially demanded the departure of all French troops from its territory within 1 month. This was not a polite request, but a firm, non-negotiable assertion of national sovereignty. The decision was grounded in the belief that the French-led strategy had failed and that its presence was fueling anti-Western sentiment, which insurgents could exploit. For the new leadership, true independence meant taking full ownership of the nation's struggles, including its internal security. This bold step drew a clear line in the sand, signaling a definitive break from the post-colonial military arrangements that had defined the region for decades. The expulsion of French forces was more than a strategic pivot, it was a moment of profound national catharsis. It represented the toppling of a psychological barrier, proving that an African nation could say no to a powerful Western country and reclaim its sovereign space. The move was overwhelmingly popular, with citizens celebrating in the streets of Ouagadougou. They saw it as Traoré fulfilling his promise to restore national dignity. He argued that the fight for Burkina Faso must be led and won by its own sons and daughters, who have a greater stake in the outcome and a better understanding of the local context than any foreign army could ever possess. This action set a powerful precedent for the entire Sahel region and beyond. It challenged the long-held assumption that African nations were incapable of managing their own security without Western assistance. By demonstrating the political will to end a deeply entrenched military dependency, Traoré inspired neighboring countries like Mali and Niger to take similar steps, accelerating a regional realignment away from Paris. It was a clear statement that the era of French military paternalism in its former colonies was over. The security of the Sahel would now be determined by the people of the Sahel on their own terms and under their own command. In his bold defiance of Western influence and his passionate calls for self-reliance, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has inevitably drawn comparisons to one of Africa's most revered revolutionary figures, Thomas Sankara. Sankara, who led Burkina Faso from 1983 until his assassination in 1987, was a charismatic anti-imperialist icon whose radical vision for social and economic transformation left an indelible mark on the continent. Like Traoré, Sankara championed food sovereignty, fought against corruption, and challenged the neo-colonial dominance of powers like France. The parallels are so striking that honestly, many see Traoré as the spiritual successor to Sankara, reviving a revolutionary spirit that had long been dormant. Traoré himself has embraced these comparisons, often appearing in public wearing a red beret, reminiscent of the one famously worn by Sankara. His speeches are filled with Sankara's themes of dignity, patriotism, and Pan-African solidarity. By evoking the memory of the martyred leader, Traoré taps into a deep well of national pride and revolutionary nostalgia. For many Burkinabé, Sankara represents a golden age of hope and integrity, a time when their country stood tall on the world stage. By aligning himself with this legacy, Traoré positions his movement not as a mere military coup, but as the continuation of an unfinished revolution for true independence. However, while he draws inspiration from the past, Captain Traoré is careful to forge his own path, tailored to the unique challenges of the 21st century. While Sankara's fight was primarily against economic imperialism and political subservience, Traoré faces the additional complex threat of transnational jihadist terrorism. His policies, such as the mass mobilization of civilian volunteers, known as VDP, are practical adaptations of Sankara's revolutionary ideals to the current security crisis. He is not simply mimicking Sankara, he is applying the core principles of self-determination and popular mobilization to a new and dangerous context, demonstrating a blend of ideological commitment and pragmatic leadership. The revival of Sankara's ghost is a powerful political tool. It galvanizes his base, provides a clear ideological framework for his policies, and resonates with a new generation of Africans who are discovering Sankara's teachings online. This connection transforms Traoré from a simple military ruler into a symbol of a broader Pan-African awakening. He represents the hope that the ideals of one of Africa's greatest heroes can be resurrected and finally brought to fruition. In standing up to the West, Traoré is not just making a political statement, he is reigniting a flame that many thought had been extinguished forever with Sankara's death. By standing up to France and its Western allies, Captain Traoré is sending an unambiguous message to the international community. The old rules of engagement are over. Burkina Faso is no longer a passive recipient of aid or a junior partner in relationships dictated by others. His government has made it clear that while it is not closing itself off from the world, any future partnerships must be based on mutual respect, shared interests, and the unconditional recognition of Burkina Faso's sovereignty. This is a fundamental reset of foreign policy, moving from a position of subordination to one of assertive self-interest, where the needs of the Burkinabe people are the only priority. This new stance has forced a recalibration in diplomatic corridors from Washington to Brussels. While some Western nations have responded with sanctions and criticism, labeling his government as illegitimate, Traoré's administration has remained steadfast. It has diversified its partnerships, strengthening ties with countries like Russia, Turkey, and Iran, who are seen as offering cooperation without the historical baggage of colonialism or the imposition of political conditions. This is not about trading one master for another. It is a pragmatic strategy to create a multipolar network of allies, giving Burkina Faso more options and greater leverage on the global stage, ensuring it is never dependent on a single bloc. Traoré's message to the West is not one of outright rejection, but of a demand for a new paradigm. He frequently states that any country willing to help Burkina Faso achieve its goals of security and development on an equal footing is welcome. The invitation for partnership remains open, but the terms have changed. He is challenging Western nations to shed their neo-colonial mindset and to engage with African nations as genuine equals. This means supporting African-led security initiatives, offering technology transfer instead of just aid, and respecting the right of a nation to control its own resources and determine its own political future without external interference. Ultimately, this bold foreign policy is a high-stakes gamble. It risks isolating Burkina Faso from traditional sources of funding and political support. However, Traoré is betting on a different currency: the power of national pride and the potential for new, more equitable alliances. He is telling the world that African dignity is not for sale and that sovereignty is non-negotiable. This clear, unapologetic message is a declaration of independence in the truest sense of the word, and it is a call that is being heard and admired across a continent that is hungry for leaders who dare to speak truth to power and demand the respect their people deserve. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's vision for a sovereign Burkina Faso was never conceived in isolation. He fundamentally understands that the immense pressures of neo-colonialism and regional insecurity are too great for any single nation to bear alone. True strength, he believes, lies in unity. This conviction led to the most significant geopolitical development in the region, the creation of the Alliance of Sahel States, or AES. In September 2023, Burkina Faso, alongside its neighbors Mali and Niger, two other countries led by military governments that have similarly pivoted away from Western influence, signed a mutual defense charter. This pact formalizes a new, powerful bloc of nations committed to collective security and shared destiny, born from a common struggle. The AES is a direct and deliberate response to the perceived failures of existing regional bodies like ECOWAS. Traoré and his counterparts felt that ECOWAS had become a tool for external interests, too quick to impose sanctions on its own members at the behest of Western powers, while failing to provide effective solutions to the existential threat of terrorism. The new alliance, therefore, represents a radical break from that post-colonial architecture. It is an institution built by Africans, for Africans, with the primary goal of pooling military resources to combat the jihadist insurgencies that plague all three nations, without foreign interference or approval. This alliance is more than just a military pact, it is the foundation for deeper economic and political integration. The leaders of the AES have openly discussed plans for a future confederation, aiming to create a unified economic space that would facilitate trade, infrastructure development, and joint industrial projects. By aligning their economies, these nations hope to build collective self-sufficiency, reducing their dependence on foreign imports and creating a robust internal market. This is Pan-Africanism in action, moving beyond speeches about unity and taking the concrete, difficult steps required to build it from the ground up, starting with their immediate neighbors who share the same vision. The formation of the Alliance of Sahel States sends a powerful message that a new center of gravity is emerging in West Africa. It is a declaration that these nations will no longer be divided and ruled, Instead, they will stand together shoulder to shoulder to defend their sovereignty, reclaim their resources, and build a future on their own terms. This strategic partnership is the most tangible expression of Captain Traoré's Pan-African vision, demonstrating that solidarity is not just a lofty ideal, but a pragmatic and essential strategy for survival and liberation in a world that has for too long exploited African disunity. The impact of Captain Traoré's actions and the formation of the Alliance of Sahel States extends far beyond the borders of the Sahel. His unapologetic stance and clear, decisive leadership have really ignited a spark of inspiration across the entire African continent, especially among the youth. In this era of social media and instant information sharing, his speeches and policies have gone viral, resonating with millions who share his frustrations with the status quo. From the bustling streets of Lagos to the university campuses in Nairobi, a new conversation is taking place. Young Africans are watching this bold experiment in sovereignty and asking a powerful, transformative question: why not us? This movement isn't about idolizing a single man, but about embracing the principles he represents: self-determination, resource nationalism, and African pride. Traoré has become a symbol of a new possibility, proof that it is possible to challenge the established order and chart a different course. His actions have demystified power, showing that leaders can and should be held accountable to the needs of their people, not to foreign capitals. This has emboldened activists, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens in other countries to demand more from their own governments, fueling calls for greater transparency in mining contracts, food sovereignty programs, and a re-evaluation of security partnerships with former colonial powers. The support for Traoré is a clear indicator of a continental awakening, a growing consciousness that the unfinished business of liberation must finally be completed. This sentiment is creating a new Pan-African solidarity that is organic and grassroots, driven by a shared desire for dignity and a prosperous future built on African terms. It transcends linguistic and geographic divides, uniting people in a common cause. When Western nations impose sanctions on the Sahelian states, it is often met with outrage and condemnation from citizens in other African nations, who see it as an attack on the continent's collective aspiration for independence. This rising tide of Pan-African sentiment presents both a promise and a challenge. While it creates a supportive environment for leaders like Traoré, it also puts immense pressure on other African leaders to respond to the growing demands of their populations for genuine change. The question is no longer if Africa will pursue a more independent path, but when and how. Captain Traoré did not create this continental yearning, but he has become one of its most potent catalysts. He is holding up a mirror to the continent, and in its reflection, a new generation is beginning to see the future they want to build together. Despite the surge of national pride and a renewed sense of purpose, Captain Traoré's revolutionary vision faces a formidable reality: the ongoing war against jihadist insurgents. This is not a challenge that can be overcome with patriotic fervor alone. The extremist groups that plague vast areas of Burkina Faso are resilient, well-armed, and have spent years embedding themselves within local communities. They continue to launch brutal attacks on both military targets and civilian populations, creating a constant state of instability that threatens to undermine all development efforts. The road to total security is long and fraught with peril, representing the most immediate test of Traoré's leadership and his new security strategy. The government's reliance on the Volunteers for the Defense of the Fatherland, or VDP, is both a source of strength and a potential vulnerability. While this grassroots mobilization fosters unity and expands security reach, it also carries significant risks. Training and equipping tens of thousands of civilian volunteers is a massive logistical undertaking, and there are concerns about their command structure, discipline, and potential for human rights abuses in the heat of conflict. Furthermore, arming local communities can sometimes exacerbate pre-existing ethnic tensions. The success of this strategy hinges on maintaining control and ensuring these popular forces remain disciplined rather than devolving into unaccountable local militias. Moreover, the fight is not just military, it is a battle for hearts and minds, which requires more than just security patrols. The government must demonstrate it can provide a better alternative to the twisted ideology offered by the insurgents. This means delivering on development promises, restoring state services like schools and clinics in recaptured areas, and creating economic opportunities that give young people a stake in a peaceful future. failure to quickly fill the governance vacuum left by retreating extremists could allow them to regroup, trapping the country in a perpetual cycle of conflict and making long-term stability an ever-receding horizon. This persistent shadow of war puts immense pressure on the nation's limited resources. Every dollar spent on weapons and military operations is a dollar that cannot be invested in building a new farm, a new school, or a new factory. Captain Traoré must perform a difficult balancing act, prosecuting a brutal war while simultaneously trying to build the foundations of a new society. The insurgency is the ultimate test of his vision. If he cannot deliver security and begin to win the peace, his ambitious projects will remain just that, ambitious projects, starved of the stability they need to flourish. Captain Traoré's bold defiance of the old world order has not come without a cost. By severing long-standing ties with France and aligning with other partners, he has placed Burkina Faso directly in the crosshairs of powerful international actors. The response from many Western nations has been, well, predictably cold. They have imposed sanctions, suspended development aid, and used their influence in global institutions like the World Bank and the IMF to isolate the new government. This concerted economic and diplomatic pressure is designed to squeeze the Burkinabe economy, creating hardship for the population in the hopes that it will undermine support for Traoré's revolutionary path and force a return to the old status quo. This external pressure creates a formidable gauntlet that the young leader must navigate. Resource nationalization, while popular at home, risks scaring off the very foreign investment needed to modernize the mining sector and other industries. It can lead to lengthy and costly legal battles with multinational corporations, draining resources and creating uncertainty in the market. Critics, both internal and external, also raise legitimate concerns about the suspension of the democratic process. While Traoré's government is framed as a transitional authority, the focus on military-led security solutions has led to claims that civil liberties and freedom of the press are being curtailed, providing ammunition for those who wish to label his government as an illegitimate authoritarian regime. Furthermore, the pivot towards new allies like Russia presents its own set of complex challenges and risks. While these partnerships offer an alternative to Western dominance, they come with their own geopolitical baggage and strategic interests. Traoré must be careful to ensure that in breaking free from one sphere of influence he does not inadvertently become entangled in another. The goal is true sovereignty, not simply trading one set of powerful patrons for another. Maintaining genuine independence while building these new relationships requires careful diplomatic maneuvering and a clear-eyed understanding of the motives of all international players who now seek to engage with his government. Ultimately, Traoré is betting everything on the unwavering unity and resilience of the Burkinabe people, and on the solidarity of his African allies. He believes that the short-term pain of economic pressure and international isolation is a price worth paying for long-term freedom and dignity. The central question is whether the nation can withstand this storm. Can it endure the economic hardships and political attacks long enough for his vision of self-sufficiency to take root? The challenges are immense, a convergence of internal conflict and external hostility. His success or failure will not only determine the future of Burkina Faso, but will also serve as a powerful lesson for the entire continent. The story of Captain Ibrahim Traoré and Burkina Faso is more than just a headline from a distant African nation. It is a live-action test of one of the most powerful questions facing the continent today. Can a nation truly break free from the chains of its past and forge a future on its own terms? Traoré's rise is not the cause of this question but a consequence of a deep and growing continental hunger for an answer. He has lit a fuse of revolutionary hope, challenging the long-held belief that African nations must operate within a system built by and for others. His vision, of a nation that controls its resources, feeds its people, and defends its borders with its own citizens, is a radical yet profoundly simple blueprint for genuine sovereignty and dignity. His path is a high-wire act, performed without a safety net. The forces arrayed against him are immense, from the persistent threat of internal insurgency to the crushing weight of international economic and political pressure. The risks are astronomical, and failure would not only be a tragedy for the Burkinabe people, but would also serve as a cautionary tale used to discourage others who might dare to dream of a similar path. Yet the potential reward is even greater, the creation of a resilient, self-reliant nation that stands as a beacon of hope for the entire continent, proving that the cycle of dependency and exploitation can indeed be broken by unwavering will and popular unity. Ultimately, the question is not merely whether Traoré will succeed. The bigger question is whether Africa is ready to support and amplify this vision. What would the continent look like if more nations followed this path of assertive self-determination? Imagine an Africa that negotiates as a unified bloc, controls its own mineral wealth, builds its own industries, and ensures that its vast resources are used to uplift its own people. This is the future that Traoré's movement, and the continent-wide awakening it represents, dares to propose. It is a future where Africa is not a subject of global charity or a battlefield for foreign interests, but a powerful, independent, and prosperous global player in its own right. The journey ahead for Captain Traoré and Burkina Faso is uncertain, fraught with challenges that would make even the most seasoned leader falter, but for the first time in a long time, a clear and unapologetic alternative to the status quo is being built, not just debated. The world is watching, but more importantly, Africa is watching. What is unfolding in the heart of the Sahel may not just be the story of one young captain's audacious gamble. It may very well be the difficult, painful, but ultimately glorious birth of a new African dawn, a future finally written by and for Africans themselves.